Well, thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Ingy, and today I'm going to talk to you about a new language that I made called TestML, which is it's a test language for all programming languages, but it includes Perl 5 and Perl 6. So I'll show you all of them, but kind of concentrate mostly on Perl 5 and a little bit about Perl 6. And welcome to the only 80-minute session. Now, some people, I think Andreas has permission, and the rest of you do, of course, too. If I'm getting boring and you want to bail out because you know this, maybe you really like that Postgres session that's, towards the end of my talk, that'll give you a good excuse. You can just tell me that you like Postgres better than this thing. So how many people were programming Perl for a living in '97? Okay, a few. I started in '98, so you preceded me. And then, and how many people were not yet born in '97? Okay, at least one. So, okay. Yeah, it's cool to see a lot of new faces. I've been doing these conferences since, I think my first YAPC Europe was in 2001 in Amsterdam. It was really special. And, but this one's super special too, so I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that you're here too. All right, so. So given that, how many people have seen me talk before? Good, so a lot of new people. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm this Perl guy who likes to do things for Perl people, but in all languages. So I kind of like taking Perl ideas to other languages and see how other languages compare to Perl and that kind of thing. The first thing I wrote was inline PM. Who knows about inline PM for Perl 5 or Perl 6? Actually, many languages, Ruby and Python, both copied the inline thing, and Perl 6 is probably doing the best job of it, so that was awesome. It started off as putting C code inside of your Perl and just somehow making it magically work. And then we're like, oh, I wonder if we could put other languages like Python in there. That was like, back in the day, it was Perl versus Python, and so we were like, that would be cool. It would be kind of like a fight to the death. And we got that to work, and then people added, we just kind of opened it up, and people added 25 languages that you could put inside of Perl, and it would just run, right inside your Perl. So, and then I started, so that was my first module, actually, was the inline thing. And, I spent so much time on it, and I probably built it too big and made it too complicated because it's your first thing. And I think I'm still, one of the top 10 authors, mostly because people have maybe stopped publishing so many cPanel modules, I don't know, but close to 200 modules, just because I'll throw any piece of trash on cPanel now, and once you get used to it, it's just like dipping your toe in the pool or whatever, and then it's like, oh, this is easy. And then you go to other languages, and you're like, oh, but surely they do everything differently, but you're like, oh no, everything is exactly the same. There's a counterpart for every step along the way in all of these languages. So I've actually released stuff to all the dynamic languages that are popular, JavaScript and Ruby and Python and Perl 6, as well as Perl 5. It's not all of them, but it's a bunch. And then after it, and so who here has used YAML? Probably a lot of people. Who here hates it? Who here likes it? I'm both, kind of hate it in both. I don't think it was never meant for config files, actually. There was this, use any, or I guess TOML is any. I just found out my company is switching to TOML, and they just hired me 2 weeks ago. It's like, boom, boom. No, but then I thought about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, because YAML was never good for config, so cool, we're using any, which is what TOML basically is. Sometime in 2008, I think it was, I came up with the term Acme ISM, which was, I felt like I needed a programming philosophy, and so doing all these things in different languages, the same idea, spreading them to different languages as far as you could. And so that's, acmeism.org has a little blurb about taking your best ideas and taking them to other communities and cultures, and maybe those are written or maybe those are software. I work on the software Acmeist ideas. So so YAML is popular, and I was thinking about this morning as I was waking up. I was just like, I gave a talk in 2002 on this thing called YAML that me and a couple of guys made, and I just put out a Perl module, and it was in St. Louis. It was a YAPC, just like you're at today, about the same size crowd, and I just threw it out there, and like a couple of people that I really looked up to, you know, I was like, hey, that looked pretty cool, good job, you know, or whatever, and I was just like, oh. You know, but it's like I had no idea, and none of us had any idea that it was ever going to catch on or whatever, and now it's like, you know, and anybody that does anything in cloud, and that seems to be the whole business now, is it just has infected all of your programming, so I apologize, but all I'm saying is that, like, you know, it's like somebody was asking me today, is Perl 6 going to catch on? And I'm like, they're loving doing it, and I loved doing it back then, so, you know, follow your heart and just like put stuff out there, and it'll catch on. So TestML is totally new. Actually, it's not. It's a 15-year-old idea, and we'll get into that. But the version I'm going to show you today is only 3 months old, and I'm totally into it, and I love it, and I think it could be a real game changer, and maybe it'll take off, and maybe it won't. But you know, you can't make things be successful. You just follow your heart, and maybe they will be. And you give talks about them at YAPCs. That helps. Schema type is another ambitious thing. It's like a schema language for YAML, but it's all about, you can generate, if you define your data richly enough, you can actually, if you think about it, generate 40 to 50% of your software stack. You can generate input UIs and database schemas and server code and client code. If you look at Swagger, they do this just for REST stuff, right? You define a big wad of YAML, and you can, I don't know how much people use, who's used Swagger? They have something called editor.swagger.io. It's a split screen web page, YAML on this side, generated document on this side, documentation, and then these pull downs of download the whole server and go for what this YAML spec changed. You make a little change in the YAML, download the new server. So you're just, every time you change the spec, it'll generate a new server code, new client code, new test code, new documentation, and that could be done for all, this is for API type of stuff. Gemplet was taking, who's used template toolkit in Perl? Who's actually heard of Gemplet or used it? So Gemplet was kind of the best cPanel module I ever got to work on, because it was finished. Because I just took template toolkit and I made it work in JavaScript about 90%, and we knew when it was done because I couldn't make up anything new. You know, template toolkit was already done, so it actually had a defined scope. And so that was kind of cool. And we actually got a bunch of people, Gugad, who's sitting up here, and a bunch of other people. You helped on that, right, Gugad, on the Gemplet thing? To collaborate on it for about 6 weeks, and then it was all done. That was cool. PegX is this Acme. So if you're going to start Acme ISM, you like PegX? Yesterday somebody hated it. I don't know if he's here, but so, you know, you get the love and the hate. You got to learn to live with love and hate if you're going to be an inventor. I mean, YAML sucks. Fuck, sucks. TestML, boom. So, but at least you'll learn about it so you can hate it rightly, right? So PegX is just the simplest way I can imagine to define a parser. But so you define a grammar for a new language that you want to make. TestML, the compiler, is written in PegX, and it's implemented twice. I just wanted to implement it once, so I did it in JavaScript so I could have it in the browser and the server, but then it turned out the startup time was too slow on the server, so I redid it in Perl because PegX also existed in Perl, and it took me a few hours to port it over, and the whole test suite was written in TestML, and it passed, and I knew I was done. It was kind of cool. Ingy, you'll see later on, that's I came up with that name about 10 years ago, but now I'm actually using it. TestML compiles to Ingy, which is Lisp meets JSON. Okay. So what I'm going to show you is actually a language, and it's a data format too. It's kind of, because it's data-driven testing. So you have a way to define data tests and then a way to say what they do. But there's very little code. The code portion is like one line, and then you have thousands of test cases below it. And that one line could be 20 lines if you're doing something complicated, but almost all the time it's one line. So that one line is usually what he calls, I want to make assertions on basically this inline database. and we'll use a real database later in the talk to store millions of test cases instead of a file with just 20 to 100 type of test cases. So you apply assertions to these things. That's the code part. Each code section is an assertion, and it combinates those so that you get a matrix of assertions versus of test cases. So I intend it to work in every modern programming language, and kind of the common denominator of what you need is JSON support at this point. So, I mean, I could add JSON support to a language if it didn't have it, because JSON's a pretty simple compared to YAML language, but almost everybody supports JSON these days, so that's good. My goal was to get 20 langs done by the end of the year, but I also made a goal, since I did the first 5 languages, and I'm trying to find a person to work with, to take on, to be the kind of point person for that language. So hopefully I'll find 1 or 2 in this audience today that see a language that, and they really dig this and want to, because it's less than 1,000 lines of code of any of the languages that I did. It's about 800 lines of Perl. So not only does it doesn't impose TAP, so it works for TAP on all the 5 languages that I've done so far. It didn't have to, but it will support any back-end test framework. So in JavaScript, Mocha is a popular thing. They use unit tests, which is an XUnit framework in Python. So I have back-end subclasses to fit in with the test framework. So you can write some of your tests in TestML and the rest in the normal framework. All your data-driven stuff could be in TestML if you wanted. But the real win is when you define a test suite for something like, say, any of those languages that I mentioned, including TestML itself, where you want this thing to work in several languages. That can be a big win. So yeah, it's perfect for the multi-language acmeist projects, but it's also great. People have been, so this started off in Perl a long time ago, about 13 years ago, as a different module called TestSpace. Has anybody heard of TestSpace? So it's the worst name. Actually, I looked up today and I remembered it was called Test Chunks for a few months, and I'm like, that's a terrible name. So I changed it to another terrible name, TestSpace. It's like, it should have been Test Data Driven or something like that, but would have been a better name. But a lot of the great cPanel authors of the day, did you used to use that for some of your modules, Gugad? TestSpace? Okay, great, it was 13 years ago. So, yeah, so some of the test suites we'll see today, like the test suite for PegX, the test suite for YAML, the test suite for TestML is swappable. So like, these were all intended to be multi-language projects, but imagine you had something at work and you could just say, oh, I really would want to see what this thing would look like in Go. Then you could just already have the test suite, and you would know that once you passed the existing test suite, your Go code was done, type of thing. How many people are working in Perl shops where they're introducing Go as a new language? Anybody? Not too many. Yeah? Cool. I work at ZipRecruiter. I just started there 2 weeks ago, and I really love it. It's a bunch of really smart people who are really kind to each other. There's, I haven't met a single jerk there at all, and it's a big company. I have 200 devs. If you're and they do a ton of Perl and half remote. So if you're interested at all in that, talk to me. Okay, yeah, so it's 15, actually it was 13. It was 2005 was the first release of TestSpace. By the way, who's heard of Room? So this whole talk is in Vim, but it's really a cPanel module that's been around since 2008 called Vroom. And this is one thing that you're going to see. I always customize Vroom. In fact, when I was showing Jeff Avery, I'm like, hey, is black on white or white on black better for you? He was sitting right about there. And he's like, white on black. And also Vroom always centers your content. He's like, move it up to the top. And I'm like, well, I can't really do that. It's generated. And I'm like, well, of course I can. It's Perl. So I just added 1 line of Perl and moved all my content for you people who are curmudgeonly sitting in the back row. You can maybe have a better chance of reading it from back there. I can't even read code from the front row. So who is not born in 97? Yeah. Oh, but you're already wearing glasses. Yeah, I had really good eyes until about 40. Now I'm 54, so I'm getting old. Let's see. Anyway, so I hit enter here, and then it puts me into less. So this is my whole talk in Vroom. So I just write everything in one file. It splits it up into a bunch of little files, and I just hit spacebar, and it goes through. It's pretty cool to write talks quickly if you are like me and you don't write your talks until the day before. So, which is the Perl way, really. Okay, I want to show you a rotten example of using TestML, where rotten means rot n. So you've heard of rot 13, right? So rot n just means, why 13? Why can't I pick any number? So this is meant to be the simplest thing that I could think of that was not too simple. It's a class. It has a constructor and a method. The method takes an argument n and rots it that many times, which means rotate. And I just stole this example actually off I just found a JavaScript example of rot 13, and I modified it, and I found out it had all these bugs, which I found through writing TestML tests for it. So it's kind of cool. And then I ported it to 5 languages so that I could show you this running in all 5. Actually, so if I look at this code, so here's the rot n. This is what is called a bridge class in TestML, and this is terrible. Oh, man. Think. I solved this. What did I do? Give me a second. Something near the enter key. I had this problem last time, and boom. It's the single tick right next to the enter key. I hit the tick, and it makes it more visible for you. So, I just hacked it in because it was the easiest thing to do at the time. Okay, so sorry, that's the implementation of the rot n, not the bridge class. Sorry about that. So this is the same code written in Perl 6. Looks exactly the same, right? Here's the same code in my favorite syntax, CoffeeScript, which is nice and short, golfy. That just compiles to JavaScript. Here's I just compile that to JavaScript automatically, so I didn't write that code. CoffeeScript did. Here's the Python version. They're all the same. You just squint your eyes, and it's all the same code. These are all really the same languages. Cool. So I'm going to run make test on all of those. So I'm going to run this test suite that I haven't shown you yet. And it's going to do Coffee, Node, Perl 5, Perl 6, and Python. Let's try it. And what's it doing now? It stopped. Oh, it's doing Perl 6. So Perl 6 is inexplicably slow, and I worked with 9. Who knows 9 here? He's one of the great Perl 6 hackers. And so we looked into it, and he showed me some cool tricks about how to figure out what's going wrong, but we couldn't actually figure out. Maybe it's just that effing slow. So Python, super fast. For some reason, Python's faster than Perl on this machine, so something's broken. So, because that doesn't happen. No, seriously, on my Mac, it was about twice as. It was a little bit slower than Perl, but on this machine, it's faster. I don't know. Okay. Right. Hit the. Okay. So here's the test directory. And I have 2 tests that we're running each time. Here's one TestML directory. This is saying. So this is the label here for the tests that you were seeing on the tap output. And this says, okay, this is a test case here. It's this is what I call a block in TestML. And those begin with equals, equals, equals. And then the label comes after that. And then you have any number of data elements. And it's basically a named hash. It's a labeled hash of things. And it looks a little weird to have these extra dashes and equals inside. But it actually, when you're writing a lot of data, it gives very clear delimiters. This actually started out as a Wikitext test suite where we had a block of Wikitext and a block of HTML, a block of Wikitext, a block of HTML. And so the lines, this colon means put the data on the same line as the key. But if the lines come below without the colon, then that's for doing multi-things. And it's really easy to pick out what the key is with those 3 dashes in the front. So before you barf in your mouth, that's what's going on. And then let's look at the other test here. Right, so here's, we're rotating with different values, and here's where I can trigger a JavaScript bug that I'll do later. So then you have these bridge classes. So at some point, the rubber has to meet the road. TestML is written in its own language, and it had, so let's look at this test. It has an input and a rot13. We can see where those come from, but where does this rot word come from? Well, in each language, we define that. So in Perl 5, we define a bridge class, a TestML bridge class that has a rot method. And this will get both inputs. It'll get the input and the number. And then it will actually call the framework that we're testing, in this case, our rot_n framework, create a new object, rotate it n, get the string field out of the rot object, the rot_n object, and return it. And so in Perl 6, there's the same class. And so that's where you define these new words in TestML, and if it can't find them anywhere, it goes and looks in your bridge class, and those are methods. You can pass arguments to those methods. When you chain them together with the dots, it takes the output of the last method or input and passes that as the first argument. And then you can add on other. So in that case, we had input dot, and then we had a number passed in paren, so that was 2 arguments. And you can see that's the signature on this rot method. OK. Is everybody with me so far? Is it more or less? I mean, I know it's like I'm never even quite with me because it's kind of far out. But if you're not with me, I'm going to make you. Who has a laptop with them, like right nearby? Who's sitting next to a person that has a laptop? OK, I might make you guys I'm going to throw it out there. If you want to play along, you can do that. So, OK. So going over this test again, I'm going to go over each line. So here's a hashbang, and this is an important thing because I'm doing a prove when I was running those things, and I can run the test suites a bunch of different ways, but to get that tap output, I was doing prove. So prove calls Perl on your .t file. That's what happens, but Perl has a very magical thing. It looks at the first line of a Perl program, and if it looks like a hashbang, what it does is say, are the letters P-E-R-L. So imagine you had a program called Superlover that actually has P-E-R-L in it. So it would think that was Perl. But if it doesn't have those 4 letters in a row, it's just going to take that hashbang line and exec that for you. So if you take a Python script and say Perl foo.py, it'll run as Python just fine. So Perl's like, this probably isn't for me. Doesn't have Perl in that hashbang line. I'm going to just do what they wanted to do in the first place and be nice, which is a weird thing to do, right? It's like most people these days would just write, that's an error. You can't run Perl on that. But Larry's like, let's just be friendly, you know. There's other languages out there, you know. Let it Perl, let it Perl, let it Perl. Okay, so I just love that song. I mean, I just started playing 6 months ago, but I just play that like all the time. Kind of dig it. Okay, so we got the shebang line, and then we have assertions. And so this assertion, sorry, well, whatever. This is the important part of the assertion. You have, so a star thing says, look down in the data section and find all the blocks. So for a given assertion, I look at all of the words that have a star before them, and that means that's basically a pointer to this piece of data. And I put an implicit loop around that statement saying loop over all of the blocks, pick out the ones that have both an input and a rot13, and then execute this statement on that data block. And eventually it gets down to the point where it does some tapish thing and outputs OK or not OK to the screen, or whatever the assertion mechanism is in Mocha or XUnit. Okay, so, but in Perl and in a lot of other, in TAP and other frameworks, we have labels, and labels are really nice for tests. So in frameworks that don't support labels, I just ignore this, but this is a label. And what this plus is kind of magic. It says, take this label, and we'll show some other magics that can go in these labels later, which is really cool because you can get really meaningful labels for free. You just define one label and it can mutate a bunch of different ways. But this one says, take the test label from here and replace this plus here with this test label. Oh, and then this label says, interpolate the input thing. So it'll actually put I like pie in double quotes in this thing, which is pretty neat. So if you had a bunch of different things, you're going to see all different labels, but you only really defined the labels here and up here. And there's, yeah. So there's three types of assertions. There's equals equals, which is the most common one. That's saying does the left-hand side equal the right-hand side, but it's polymorphic. So, and the types have to be, so TestML is a strongly typed language. It has 12 types. It inherits all the types of JSON, and then it adds 6 others, which I'll get into later. But they're simple. They're like regex and error and nothing at all, like empty set type of thing. It's like when you return nothing in a list context in Perl, that kind of thing. Because sometimes you have these methods that you're chaining together and you don't really want to return anything. You just want to do something and call the next method. Anything that is a word with a all lowercase is a bridge method. And so that sounds a little artificial, but in a language where you only have 1 or 2 lines, that's a really clear way to see if something starts with a capital letter, it belongs to TestML. It's defined by TestML. And you'll see there's some special variables and special methods that are provided for you that are super handy. There's a standard library of methods that begin with a capital letter. Any variable that starts with a lowercase letter, if it's used as a function, is looked up in your bridge class. Let's see, I'll go back and we've already looked at those bridge classes, okay? So if you have a laptop, do this. Go to testml.org, and for the people that don't have a laptop, I'll just show it up here. But it's kind of cool. And then it's just gonna. It's actually the site is like it's gonna say under construction, but there's gonna be a playground link. Click on the playground link because that's actually fully functional. And so I'll just click on it directly here. Well, I'll show you the website. So when you write a new language, and your favorite, I'm not sure what happened there. Any ideas? Ubuntu, ThinkPad, HDMI? Okay. Am I overloading this HDMI cable? It's only terminal ready? Okay. That's kind of what it seems to be. Let me go to the playground and see if it can handle that. Okay. This is a great thing about an 80-minute, well, maybe it's not, but you could just ask for help. I won't play any more songs for you. You wouldn't want to. Yeah? Yeah, it worked. Don't touch it. Thank you. Nice, nice. Okay, so check this out. Who's used CoffeeScript at all? So CoffeeScript is cool, and it has, if you go to coffeescript.org, it has this long page of it's basically a book of everything in CoffeeScript, and but all of the examples are interactive, and CoffeeScript just compiles to JavaScript. So it'll show you examples on the left-hand side, and it'll show you the JavaScript that it produces, but you can change those examples in real time. This is the same thing, except we need 3 components. So here we have a test, and we're testing some math things. The math bridge class is defined over here in CoffeeScript, and it's pretty easy to read. You just have a class and 4 methods that take a x and a y and do a add, subtract, multiply, or divide. And this is just one example. So if I change the data over here to 66, I've broken all those tests, right? Now look at the labels of those tests. You can actually see the data because what did we do? We interpolated the values. If you look at the labels on the left-hand side, they go right into there. And if I delete that character again, then the test passes again. Now that's the tap output, but since this is JavaScript, people might want to see the mocha output. And I made this so that it creates a permalink up at the top, so if people want to get their configuration, it doesn't actually, I should have it so you could edit the thing and it would actually put the content in, but for right now it just kind of gets the setting that you're at. The other thing is you can look at the compiler. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assertions, and it looks like 2 test blocks, giving us a total of 10 tests in this case. And let's see if tap agrees. Yes. Oh, 9. Something goofy going on there. There's a reason for that. It's because not all of these are the same. So like when I was saying before, this is the only one that has a D in it. So this is only going to run 1 test because there's only 1 block down here that has a D in it. This, if I can, yeah, that final block. So it's not that every assertion is applied to every block. It's that every assertion, that every block that matches can be applied to that assertion runs. Here's the compiler output for the TestML program. And this is also done live. So, and since the compiler was written in JavaScript, and that's kind of why I wrote the compiler in JavaScript at first, was so that I could put it in here and also run it on the server. There's just one compiler. Well, now there's 2 because the JavaScript was so slow on the server to start up that I ported it to Perl in a few hours. Let's see. So there you can see the data section down there. You can see how everything matches up. Here's the Lisp form, and I have my own pretty printing of the JavaScript so that you can actually read this. And this code is called Ingy. So that's the Ingy thing I was talking about, this format. And it turned out since I could run this code in all these languages, I decided to make Ingy its own language. I haven't done it yet, but Ingy can easily be its own language so that I can write programs in this terrible format and they would run anywhere. But if I write a simple syntax, like something beautiful, like say CoffeeScript that compiles to Ingy, now CoffeeScript, instead of just running on JavaScript, can run anywhere. Let's just think about that for a second. So it's QED, right? I mean, it's just like, you know it's going to work. OK, so let's get back to, so this is one example. I have the entire TestML test suite is under here. So we were looking at this one to figure out why Perl 6 was slow. So this is testing all the polymorphism elements of TestML. And here we can see that it's passing tap and it's passing mocha. And so in the entire YAML test suite, if you saw, who saw Tina's talk on YAML earlier? So this is every one of those tests, almost every one of those tests that is embedded in this page. So you can actually run them. So we could just pick this test, and if you were in that talk, you can kind of recognize what's going on there. And all the compiler also has, these are all the tests for a TestML compiler. So later I want to write the TestML compiler in Haskell and distribute it as a binary. And all I got to do is make the Haskell. I just give it to a Haskell expert and I say, make it pass this test suite, and then I know it's done. Until we find somewhere where it's broken, we add another test and we fix it, and then it's done again. All right? OK. We hang out on pound TestML. Well, I hang out there. Tina hangs out there begrudgingly, and some other people. OK, so let me show you some. So TestML has you can use prove to run these tests, but it also has a command line test. If you just run TestML by itself or with a -h, you get this help thing. And it shows you all these flags that you can pass. So what we're going to do here is use TestML to run a .tml file, which is a test file. And it can be called a .t file in Perl. So we run it, and it blows up. It's saying, I don't know which TestML language to use, basically. I don't know whether you want Perl or Python. I don't know whether you want TAP or Mocha. You need to tell me. So let's tell it. So in this case, we're going to say run Perl 6. Now Perl 6 defaults to TAP, so I don't have to tell it that. And Perl 6 runs really slow. So let's run it in Python, which runs really fast. So in Python, TAP is not the default. So I say use the -r flag this time, which is the same as setting that environment variable. And I'm going to say run it on Python TAP. And then let's run it in Python unit. So this is the default backend. So these are what tests look like when they run in Python, which is a lot uglier than Perl. But that's their test framework. They love it. So not sure why. Here's the Ingy again. We've already seen that. You can use TestML to actually just compile. You can call it with the ---- compile flag, and that will actually compile to a cache area. But if you use the ---- print, it'll just print a standard out. So we'll do that here. Same thing. And here we're going to write a one-liner. So we have the -e flag that's like in Perl, right? And we also have this capital S sum. And I told you about this before. There's a standard library. Well, the sum is really not that useful, but it's great for talks and presentations and examples like this. So I put that in the standard library. Let's run that. And that works. No label or anything, but it added those 3 numbers together, and they worked. And here, right, so this is going to run the Node.js tap output for one of those rot tests that we looked at before. Cool. OK, so here's how you install TestML. You just git clone it. And I have a bunch of stuff on cPanel that work exactly like this. And then you source a file called .rc in the thing. And that will set up your path, any Perl-specific paths, a man path, so you can have man pages. I usually put man pages in most of my projects that install this way. So instead of cPanel emming TestML, and I'll get to that in a second, this is how you do it right now. Because this isn't really a Perl thing, this is a multi-language thing that you're using to write tests in Perl or in Python or in Perl 6. But you can also, at the end of the talk, and I should watch the time here, we're going to show how to ship a module. When does this talk end, you guys? Where we started, so I'm 40 minutes in, so I'm halfway through. And that's good, so I'm at 10 out of 40 slides, doing great. Well, you know, they don't all go the same length. They get longer at the end. So. OK. So if you have a laptop, I'd appreciate it if you actually did this. I mean, you can do it in the background. Clone the repo, and then cd into that repo and run make test. Actually, the localization blew up on a German guy I was working with yesterday at the table, and I fixed all those bugs. So I'd love to know. And also, it tests in 5 languages. I added something that says if you don't have Perl 6 on your machine, it won't run the Perl 6 test. So I just, if you could do that. So the GitHub URL is TestML-lang, TestML-lang/TestML. And then you just cd in there and run make test. TestML was some like 0 commit user from I probably could have asked GitHub for TestML, but I'm just like, I want to do it. OK. So here's the weird thing. This is kind of hard to explain, but let me just say that I'm 3 months into writing this thing, and it's just not. So when you're doing something in cPanel, you expect to install it from, because to you, if you're using TestML in Perl 5, you're using TestML in Perl 5. You just want to cPanel install TestML and be good to go and start doing your stuff. That will be the case in a month, but right now, installing TestML from cPanel, I put it out there, but it's really not going to help you at all. And actually, if you ship a module with cPanel, or sorry, with TestML, it bundles all of the runtime stuff you need for that test. So the cool thing about that is that whatever you test with is what everybody else is going to test with for all time. So it's not any future version of TestML is not going to break some module that you wrote with TestML today. That's always going to work as long as it worked on your machine up front. The other thing is that your module you can use this great new test framework without having your module depend on TestML. And so, I don't really like adding a lot of deps to my modules that aren't needed, just because there's some cool new thing. It's kind of a balance, It's got to be really worth it for me to add it as a dep. You can leave. It's okay. Be tall and proud. It's not for everybody, or not for everybody for 80 minutes. So, yeah. So it started 13 years ago, and then nine years ago, I decided that this TestSpace thing really applied to all languages, and so I made my first attempt at making it work, and I got it working in about 3.5 languages, but it was kind of heavy-handed. And then this year, I redid it in a way that's really easy to port to all these languages. So there was an old TestML on cPanel, and so it's kind of not a cPanel module. It will be a cPanel module, and it was another cPanel module called TestML. But I looked around. I looked pretty hard, and I found out that really I was only one using it, and I had already bundled it into all my modules. So if I removed it, it wasn't going to break anything. So what I did was I took that old one and recalled it TestML1, which sounds a little weird. I should have called the new one TestML2, people might think, but I'm like, I'm certain this is the new way. So I want to make this the TestML. I don't want it. People are going to be like, why is it called TestML2 in Perl and TestML in other languages? And since no one else was using it, I made that decision. And I haven't gotten any feedback from the dark pan that I've killed anybody's puppy yet, so I feel okay. Okay, so here's some one-liners, more one-liners that you can do. It gets cool when we start using the semicolon. So, but let's run these anyway. So this is a simple one. Does 1 equal 1? And it does. Okay. Does 1 equal 2? Of course not. Expected, or got 1, expected 2. Now, this is what happens here. We're saying does 1 equal string 2? Well, of course it doesn't, but does it fail? No, it blows up. This is a bad error message. It was on my list to try to fix it before the talk, but you only get so far. We do all this for free. So this is saying that the method assert num equals string doesn't work. And so I kind of build up this polymorphic test method. The middle part equals is my equals equals assertion. There's also a like and a has, which have a different operator. And then the left-hand side is the left-hand side. So we have a num on the left and a string on the right. And I build this up dynamically, and then I go and look and see, do I support this polymorphism of number equals string, which I never will. And it doesn't work in this case. But I might support other kinds of polymorphism that doesn't exist today. OK. So here we pass multiple minus e's. And what's this going to do? Well, if it just jammed them all together, it would be a syntax error. But if it put them on separate lines, which it does, then it would just work. Now that's cool, except for, so you can also do that with semicolons. But the semicolons have a space after it. And that leading space, it's an indentation-based scoping when you actually define functions, which is kind of a lesser used but supported thing. It's you can have these. We'll see these in a second. So I say if there's, just take the spaces out after the semicolon. But now look at this one. This has 2 spaces after the semicolon. Why would I do that? Well, so this is hard to see what this is actually going to do, but it runs 9 tests. Here, I rewrote it the way you would write it in a program, not on a one-liner. So what I'm doing is taking an array, an array literal of 3 elements, and it doesn't matter that those are 1, 2, or 3. It's just 3 things, and then I'm calling the percent is in each, and the thing on the other thing is like a sub. It's like a sub in Perl. It's a anonymous function that takes 1 argument. And so I'm going to take each of the elements and pass it to this function, and then I'm going to make 3 assertions. And so 3 times 3 is 9, and that's why we get 9 tests. Does that make kind of sense to everybody? So the cool thing here was I indented 2 spaces because that's the scope of the function. So I just said you're never going to indent. You're never going to put 2 spaces after a semicolon. So if you do, you mean something. So I'm just going to save that as your indentation. So you can actually put indented code inside a one-liner, which I really haven't seen in other languages. I kind of compared like I haven't seen these multiple E's in anything but Perl. Perl does this, not Perl 6. What's that? Oh, sed. Oh, okay. Yeah. Could you write the sed version of TestML for me? Okay. Okay, so here's my little rant on testing, and this is why I think TestML really makes a lot of sense in your workplace production. So I'm going to make this pitch, and you can agree with it or not. But when you have too much code, it's bad. So I worked at HP for a year, and these people were writing tons of code. And it was my first time at an enterprise company in a long time. And I'm like, you're paying 100 people to write as much code as they can this quarter. Then they got to maintain that code the next quarter while they write as much new code as they can. You're making this boat anchor to slowly sink your massive ship to the bottom of the ocean. Why are you doing this? So the more code you have, the more maintenance you have. Tests themselves are code. And so I know that the booking people have given talks on strongly not using tests because they want to move more agilely and not have to maintain double the amount of code. Who's seen Abigail's talks on don't test from way back? Nobody. Okay. You have somebody? Maybe. I thought I saw a movement. But if tests are mostly data, they're much easier to maintain. Think about it. Data doesn't have any side effects. You don't have to look at a piece of a string or a number and say, what does this really mean? It means what it says, right? And then somebody said, yeah, but your schemas change all the time. Your data changes all the time. I'm like, yeah, but data, we transform data all the time. What if we could, if you could just take the TestML data, run it through the transform to match what you're doing. It seems compelling that if your tests are mostly data, you can add as many as you want and not be making this boat anchor heavier with test code. So I don't know if that hits home with anybody. How many people think that's somewhat valid? And how many think that's bullshit? Yeah, well, some people probably think it's slightly bullshit. I mean, it's not proven, but it seems logical to me. Okay, I had an old friend. He helped me make the first TestSpace back at Social Text, this wiki company I was talking about, back in 2004. We put it out on cPanel. It actually kind of caught on with, I don't know why it caught on, but Ogawa started using it. Who knows Ogawa from back in the day? He wrote everything cool, cPanel, Plaque, all the stuff that you guys, a lot of the stuff you guys rely on. He's a quiet guy, but super prolific cPanel author. And like I have 200 modules, he has like over 200 good ones. So yeah. Yeah, and then I kind of went through this. I did the 2010. So last year in 2017, I worked for a company called OpenResty. And these guys, I've told a few people, but they wrote everything in Perl 6 in a version of Perl 6 that they wrote themselves in 3 months that took 60 to 70% of Perl 6 language and compiled it to Lua JIT, because Lua JIT is the scripting language for Nginx, and that was their product. They're this massive CDN, content-moving, fastest web server ever, and actually all of the major content movers of China. It was 10 Chinese guys and me, and they hired me because they used all this TestSpace for over 150 repos with thousands of tests in each. They completely used TestSpace for everything. Every kind of test was all TestSpace, almost without fail. So that was cool, and I went to work for them. And they also used PegX to write this Perl 6 that compiled to Lua JIT. So they bootstrapped with the Perl 5 PegX. So while I was there, I wrote 3 languages. I took the template toolkit, and I made that compile to Lua. And they said I could open source all this stuff. So now I have the grammar to make template toolkit compile to any language. I just needed like a week to do that. So if anybody wants to help with that, let me know. Any language you want. If that would be useful for you, get a hold of me. I did the schema type thing, which actually generated a lot of generated all their database schemas and other types of code from a nice tight syntax. And I did TestML. All this work that I'm showing you today they paid me to do in-house for them. And then they said I could just port it and and release it open source. And that's what I did for this. I started in May because it was conference-driven development. I'd signed up for the June YAPC, and I'm like, I better get off my ass. May 1st, I think when I started doing this. But I'd already done it all. I'd already done it all for OpenResty, and that was great. So, and it's also, yeah, so like Tina was showing, the entire YAML test suite is now using that. I'm going to skip this slide. OK, so this one is actually going to run 4 test suites. I'm going to run the runtime test suite in Node, Perl 5, and Python only because they're the fastest. Actually, Node's a little slow. And then, but maybe not. And then I wrote the compiler twice. For the Node tests for the compiler is slow. So let's just run it. So these are the compiler tests, and we are done. Cool. So that's all of TestML testing itself. Here's the Python using just the unit test stuff that they like, no tap. And here's a look at the runtime. So if you wanted to take a language like sed and make it work for TestML, you would just have to make these 18 TML tests pass. Here's the one we were looking at before, et cetera. OK. Sometimes you get ahead of yourself, but you shouldn't worry about it too much if you give a talk. It's just you just get to skip slides at the end and actually catch up. So the only thing I'll say about this slide is like TestML, you have this test suite, and it will compile them once and save that into a cache called the .testml directory. Just kind of like Perl 6 has a .precomp directory, which is a weird name. And I'm not sure why it's not the Perl 6 .Perl 6 library or directory. Anyway, it compiles them to Ingy, and those Ingy tests sit around until you change the file, and then it will recompile those. So it's kind of on demand. So it runs a tiny bit slower. But now that the test compiler is Perl 5, it actually runs super fast. Did you know that the Perl 5 startup time is only twice as long as, who knows the Unix command true? The Unix command true just returns return code 0. It doesn't do anything, right? So the load time, if you say Perl minus E1, which is the smallest Perl program you can possibly write, it takes twice as long as the true command. That's how quick Perl is to start up, which is just amazing to me. So this compiler is 1.0 complete. It passes all the tests. It has a 300-line grammar that we can look at right here. So this is PegX. So this is the entire, it's really simple and cool. It's like you say the top level thing you want to parse is a TestML document, and that consists of a head section, code section, and data section. And you just have to redefine everything. Everything ends in a regex. So this is going to be a regex. But the regexes also refer to rules. So this is going to take this rule, which must be a regex, and kind of plop it in. And so when you compile this grammar, it actually turns into just a big JSON structure with regexes that can be a mile long. But when you're actually defining the thing, I mean, look at this. It's actually very readable. And so that's the entire language of TestML defined in a quite readable syntax. And that's PegX. And that will work in any programming language. It's a little. Sometimes when you give a talk, you got to suspend disbelief. I mean, or you got to lie a little is what I'm trying to say. So, you know, I mean, PegX. So there's a little bit of language code that you have to write for each of these implementations. You know, because you have to make it do something, and you have to make it do it in that language. But the definition is just written once. I shouldn't have even told you that. Why would I tell you that? Okay. This is just the compiler suite. If you want to write a new compiler in Haskell, anybody know Haskell? Awesome. One of you guys better, Herbert, you love doing Ingy stuff. Not really. I don't know. You got it. Yeah, in Haskell. Make this test suite pass in Haskell, please. And then you'll have written the canonical TestML compiler. Okay, so now I haven't shown you any of the code features. I'm going to show you some of those. I'll show you the data features first. So we already went out. These are blocks. And then the hash elements, line and text, are points. And remember before I was talking, this is a single line, no new line at the end, piece of text. This is a 2-line with 2 new lines at the end of each line, block of text. I don't keep the third line. That's just white space for nice separation. There's a way to keep that, but by default I don't keep it. I like to make my tests look really nice and just do the right thing. This one says define a line point, but just take it from the block above. And you can do that as many times as you want, as long as you don't define a new one in between. This one says define a point called more, but use the value from text above. And then this is what's called a pseudopoint. There's 6 of them, but only is the most popular one. So when you're actually debugging something, if you put this only line on it, it'll be like the whole others didn't exist. They won't even go into the compiled Ingy thing. It'll just make this block the only block that you're testing against, which is really useful when you're working on a specific test where you have the hundreds or dozens of blocks. Okay. Remember when I said the blank lines don't count? If you put a plus symbol in parentheses at the end of foo, it'll keep them for you. And there's a bunch of little things. This says, so any line anywhere in the file that begins with a pound is a comment, but sometimes you're testing comments, so you actually want the pounds to be kept in this section. So this will keep the pound lines. Those pounds are really useful because sometimes you just want to comment out data. Sometimes you want to comment out code. Sometimes you want to put a comment in front of a data section saying, this is what I'm actually trying to do with this test right here. It looks a little weird, but here's what I'm trying to do. This is the opposite of the plus. It's the minus. It says chomp off that final new line. So this will just have to be XXX, new line, YYY, end of string. I won't go through all of them, but I do want to get through the @ sign and the slash. This is going to say, turn this thing into a regex. So this 3-line thing is going to become a regex. This is going to become a regex. The @ sign says, okay, so the tilde says strip out all the blank lines. I just put them in there to make it look nicer, but strip them out before you compile this, and then split those lines into an array of 3 lines. So the value for this baz thing is not going to be a scalar or a string. It's going to be an array of 3 lines with the new lines removed from them. This is sometimes useful, but it's super useful when you have 2 regexes. So let's say you're testing an error. Errors are weird because you can't match it on a specific error because there's all this junk in it. But you're like, I want to match a regex here and a regex here and a regex here in this error message, this multi-line error message. And so what you do is you define 3 lines, 3 different regexes, and then you say @/. This says, and they can be in any order. It always does @ first. It'll split these into lines, and then it'll make each line into a regex. And so that's about all I want to show you on that. These are the other pseudopoints. You can say, they're not as useful as only, but say skip this one. That's kind of useful. When I've started this test, but I haven't really made it work yet. I'm going to skip it. Head means start here. Skip all the ones below it. And last means end here. Skip all the ones after it. I don't use those so often. I won't talk about the other 2. I will look at the time. Cool. Okay. So here are the code features. We already talked about how this thing is going to have an implicit loop around it where it selects all the blocks that have a foo and a bar. This is a very rarely used feature, but this says also make it a condition that the block cannot have a baz. So sometimes like in the TestML tests, we have these things where we have an input in this event stream, but some of them are errors. And so we want to run a certain test where they don't have the error component. And you would think, well, why would you have the event stream? Well, it's because Tina wanted to keep the event stream. So this is actually for you, Tina. No, there were test cases at OpenResty where they needed this. They actually had like 6 components for a block. And like an assertion might use 2 or 3 of them. So they had all these blocks of related data and all these different assertions, but not every assertion used every point in the block, every hash element in the block. Here are all the variable types. Like I said, since I compile the JSON, I just make those the native types. But I have 6 others. I have none, which means an empty set. I have a regex, which you can imagine what that means. I have an expression, which is this internal Ingy expression. This is add these 2 numbers, assign it to this variable type of expression. I have a user-defined function, which we saw already. And then I have a native type. So let's say you had star input dot foo dot bar equals star output. You want to foo is going to do something in Perl. It's going to pass some DBI object that bar is expecting. Now TestML doesn't know anything about DBI objects at all. So by the time you do the assertion, you have to kind of be a string, a number, or one of these types. But in between, native, that's what it means. It's like, just pass this node along. It's a pointer to something. I don't care what it is. And so you can actually pass Perl things between bridge functions that way, or standard. Let's see. All of the so you can assign to variables. In fact, when you define a function, you just say foo equals and then this anonymous sub. That's kind of how you do it in JavaScript too. You just say variable equals function. I mean, you could do it the other way, but it's just sugar, right? And in Perl, you could say my dollar function equals sub something like that. So the globing is the variable. The programs are so short that I just, for ease of implementation in 3 months and giving a talk, I didn't add per function scope variable scoping because it's just not, you don't have functions that often. Global is fine, but the scoping is not a hard thing for me to do, so I will do that. Here are the other 2 assertions. This is saying do a regex match. Now this is kind of cool because you can say, okay, the thing on the right is a string, the thing on the left, the thing on the left is a string, the thing on the right is a regex that has to match. But it could be an array of regexes. So this is where the polymorphism goes from string to multi, or you could have multiple strings that all must match one regex, or multiple strings that must all match the multiple regexes. So you can have arrays of strings, or a single string, arrays of regexes, a single regex, and all those are polymorphic for the regex thing. The has, it looks like the Perl 6 smart match operator. It's really much dumber than the regex thing. All it is saying, it's a substring. But that's really useful when you're writing tests. And it also says it's more polymorphic in that if you have an array on the left and a string on the right, it says, does that string exist somewhere in that array? But if it's a string on the right, on the left, and a string on the right, it says, does that right thing a substring of it? So it tries to be polymorphic in the ways that make the most sense for doing testing. I'm sure I'll get bug reports and pull requests where they want more polymorphism or different polymorphism. We'll see. It's still a young language. Okay. Here's a quick, so there's the assignment operator, that's obvious. There's the or equals exactly like you would expect in Perl. We've seen the foo lookup, the point lookup, which just returns the data value. We saw the each where we iterated over a listy thing. This was a function definition with arguments. So I could put x comma y in there if I wanted to. Oops. I think I have to. Okay. And the label thing, you put a colon between the label and the assertion. And so the label can come after the assertion or before. But you just, like if it comes before, you put a colon after you put it in between. It just seemed to make sense to me. There's no keywords. Now, the thing I like about Perl, and like everybody says the dollar signs stink in Perl, right? You know, when you talk to other languages. Yeah, well, you try making a variable called if in your sweet language, right? You can't do it, right? But we can, because we have $if. We can make 3 different, we can make an array called if, a hash called if. We can use any word that we want as a variable name. Well, in TestML you can too, because I didn't have any keywords. There's no if, there's no function, there's no package, there's just no keywords. So. And there haven't really even been a need for things. And if I need a keyword, I'll figure out a way to not make it just look like a bare word. And that's kind of important when you're parsing things around. So this is an interesting thing. Who knows what pass is in Python? Anybody? It's like so you write a function definition, and you can't have an empty function because it's indentation based. So you have to. It's a no-op, and you just put a pass line in there. Well, in TAP, I had pass as a method. So when I went to port it to Python, I'm like, no, I got to rename this thing. So it stinks. My general rule is I just put an underscore at the end of anything that doesn't work in Python. So I just make it pass underscore or whatever if I need it internally. But Python really has you hit those collisions when you're porting the most, I've found. Clock up in. Okay. All right, 13 more minutes, hang in there. Maybe I'll get to something cool. So I'm going to run that. Let's see. These are not interesting. I want to get to this database thing where we run 20,000 tests at once. It's because it's cool. So I'll go to that. We seen that? Let me show one thing really quick. So here was a passing test in TAP. And Gugad's putting his glasses on, indicating to me that the font is too small. So the thing on the left doesn't matter. So I'll just make it drop off there. Can you read that without the glasses, Gugad? Yeah. Oh, cool. And probably other people can too. Okay, so here we have this event stream, and this piece of YAML is it's a long event stream. But so what happens if I change this to docx? Nothing. I got to see what my assertion is. Obviously, okay, so I'm only looking at. I don't have anything working with that. But let's change this to. Okay, so we got a test to fail there, right? But what we had was we had set diff equal to true up here. It automatically, that was multiple lines. If I were to set diff to false, I couldn't see that, the difference is just on that one line. So let's set it to false here. It's going to give me the big input and the big output, and I'm never going to see, just looking at it, where the difference is. So I think I might actually make diff the default. So diff is kind of cool. But you said that's a TestML variable because it begins with a capital D, and it turns on diffing. If diffing exists in that language. I don't have it working in Perl 6, so diff does nothing in Perl 6 because I just couldn't find a good differ in the cPanel yet. OK, so here's my SQLite thing. I thought this was kind of cool. I hope it still works. OK. So basically, that data format is just a little database, right? I mean, a list of hashes is really a TSV, which is really you can think of them as just a table of columns and rows, where each row is a test case. So what if we actually did that? What if we wrote? I wrote this one-liner, and it's just kind of silly, but I wrote this math.perl.15 thing, and so I'm going to run it, and it actually outputs YAML, turns that into JSON, runs this JQ program to turn it into TSV, and then calls this SQLite thing to import it into a little SQLite database. And so every time I run this, I'm going to get different data. You can see it keeps changing, random data. But let's change it to, what do we say, 20,000? Oh, shit. I can do this. Sometimes you just got to believe. I'll use XX. Yeah, like my delete goes back a slide, so I can't use delete. Escape, enter. Boom. OK, so that's 20,000 test cases, and now let's run them. Uh-oh. It's on a branch. Well, I screwed up, but it worked. I got 20,000 TAP tests that run in just a couple seconds, and it's all pulling them out of this this test database instead of out of the data section. And all I did was define a a standard, and I didn't want to make it part of master yet because I don't know if I'm going to stick with it, but it's just basically this. Let's look at the test actually. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so this is a capital letter thing. It's pulling it from the standard library saying use the MathDB SQLite file and use the math table and then run everything that has a B, and C column in it, which is all of them, and just add A to B and see if it equals C, which I already set up the generated data to do that. So that's kind of fake data, but you can imagine having a database with millions of tests in it. I mean, even that you produced by any kind of means that were actually meaningful, not just random data like this. Oh, shit. That's my total talk. All right. I got 7 minutes, and I'm going to use them. So this is kind of the who's written a cPanel module here? Hopefully a bunch of you. OK. So I'm going to show how I only have one module that I've switched over. So all of my modules use TestSpace or the old TestML or something. I switched one over to use the new TestML because it was kind of new. And I'll show you how I did it. So I'm going to show PegX.json. These are all the languages that I want to port this to. I'm going to end with this. So there's the end of the slides. But don't clap because it's not over. So, oh yeah. Tina said I had a lot of aliases. This will be useful. Okay. Back up 3 directories and cd into. So PegX JSON is just a JSON parser that I wrote in PegX as a proof of concept. So it's not an important module. It's a great example. So the PegX grammar of JSON is about this long. The Perl code to implement this thing is about this long. And if I look in the test directory, here's the TestML, the new TestML. So I'm going to take some JSON. I'm going to load it. I'm going to dump it as YAML. And then I'm going to see, does it match the YAML expected output here? And so there's a bunch of tests. And let's just say, let's prove it. So we're developing it. We say prove minus. Interesting. OK, so I didn't install TestML, so let's do that. Dot system. I don't install TestML because I want usually my development environment to not have it in it so that I know that I'm not grabbing something out of the environment. What? Because I'm developing TestML. If I was in other scenarios, I'd definitely want it in my path. OK, so now I have TestML in my path. Boom. Now I should be able to prove this test suite. Boom, it works. Now I want to ship this thing. So because I'm Ingy, I don't use ZillaDist or DistZilla. I use ZillaDist, which is just a slight wrapper over. So all of my modules look like this. I keep my code in lib, but I put my tests in a test directory because I'm coding in Python and Ruby and all these languages at once. Nobody uses T except Perl. So, this is. Okay, so now what I'm going to say is Zilda cPanel. And so I'm going to do the steps of how I would just say release if I wanted to release this, but I'm going to actually cd to the cPanel directory. It took that directory and turned this into what you would expect. I'll move it up to the top so you can see it. This is just a distzilla directory. There's a dist.ini, and let's look inside of it. got that stupid. I'm going to switch to a. Can people deal with it? Is it readable? Maybe it was even better all along. I don't know. The cool thing about this is I added a plugin for Distilla called TestML Includer. And let's see what it does. So now I'm going to say diesel build. So I'm building a dist for upload to cPanel. And then let's cd into PegX JSON 028. And we have an Inc directory. Let's see what's in there. So I say find Inc. I'll do it at the top again. OK. So this actually puts in all of the TestML code. It puts in all of the precompiled tests. So I have test.tml.json. That's precompiled to Ingy, so I don't need to compile it on the user side. And then I add a section to the end of the make file that changes the test in Inc to look like this. Sorry, it changes the test in T to actually call the Inc bin TestML cPanel thing. So it does this rearranging of your testing to have everything bundled internally. But let's see what happens. We say Perl makefile.pl, and we say make test. And now we're on some user box with no TestML, nothing, and everything works, and we're all happy. And TestML has made you happier, and thank you. I'd gladly take a couple questions. I have 35 seconds. Yeah. Sure. Let's see if it's a 1, 2. Let's see if we use them here. I'm just hoping we do. No, there's no labels here. Catch me afterwards and I'll show you gladly. One more question? Anyone? Yeah. Well, we just showed you in that last one where we, of course. Yeah, I mean, we showed you where we dynamically generated a database full of test cases. And actually, we pre-generated that database. But you could have a plugin that actually generated test cases from some other program. And that's actually something I hadn't thought of, so I appreciate that comment. I hadn't thought of that specifically, and I'll make that happen for the next time. Thank you. The question again was, could you have dynamic data sections? Where before we dynamically created a static one, and it wasn't truly dynamic. Well, thank you very much. And I'm on Pound TestML all the time, and I'm here for the rest of the conference, and I like to drink beer. So if you find me at the bar, chat me up. Thanks.